Did you ever see a game get announced and think, whose idea was that?
So here's this giant enemy crab.
No, that's not what I mean. I mean, before I was in the game industry, I used to wonder whose job is it to come up with the ideas? Well, what a perfect place to begin with this first episode in this brand new podcast series about how video games are made by professional studios. Welcome to the Crunch Button. Yeah, welcome to the Crunch Button. This is a brand new podcast that aims to pull back the digital curtain and talk about how video games are made by professional studios. You might be a gamer who is interested to know more about that process. And perhaps you've got questions like, why do games take so long to develop? And why isn't the DLC included in the game at launch? Or maybe you are a student or somebody who wants to join the industry, or perhaps you are already in the industry, but for whatever reason you're here, you're super welcome. I'm very glad that you have joined us. Wherever you're here, we hope that you find this information useful. Please let us know. My name's Nathan Baseley. I've been in the video game industry for 17 years as a producer and a game director, which has given me a bird's eye view of this whole process. So we're going to begin our podcast with a series of short intros to different subject areas. And that will give us time to receive your comments and feedback on what areas you'd like us to go into more depth on in the future. So please let us know. And of course, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. So today's intro goes right to the very beginning of the process and asks, where does the idea for a game come from? Is it somebody's job? How does it develop? Why does that idea get picked? What's that process look like? And how does it vary from studio to studio? Okay, let's get started. So as I was joining the industry all those years ago, I was told there's no such thing as the ideas man. That's largely true. In most cases, in my experience, there isn't one person in a studio whose job it is to come up with the idea for the next game that you're going to be working on. But there's a lot of caveats. For starters, there are still auteur-driven studios. They may be the exception, but they exist, and I've worked for an auteur. It's a very different way of running a project. And either because they are self-funded or because they're previous contribution to the industry is so significant that they are able to get funding whatever their idea is. That makes them exceptional. That makes them different to how most studios run. I think that's how I used to think all games were made, but that is rare now. In most other cases, there is a publisher or a client or an investor who is available to the development team in terms of funding, and the development team at the beginning is trying to pitch for that funding. I've worked for a first-party studio where the lines between those different groups is softer, but that's still what's happening. You've still got a central budget, and then you've got development teams within that first-party family who are making a request for that funding. In other cases, there might be a publisher that has got funding for something. A good example might be there's a publisher that has got some funding for a PlayStation 6 day one release. That's what they want. That's part of their business plan. They want to be seen on that cutting edge. They want something day one. And so they are going to developers that they've worked with before and they're saying, we've got some funding for a PlayStation 6 launch title. What would you do if you got that funding? Let's take Wicked as an example. It's just done brilliantly at the box office. There may be some people somewhere that have that IP that are going to game developers and saying, hey, we've got some budget for a Wicked game. What would you do with it? So what we're talking about at the very beginning of a project is the opportunity for the developer to get some money to make something. But that's not, in most cases, except auteurs perhaps, that's not a complete blank canvas. The developer can't really just invent any idea they like. They're being given some goalposts. They're being told, we want something for PlayStation 6 day one launch, or we have the Wicked license, what would you do with it? Or we have got this strategy to get into multiplayer games, what could you do? And so that first step for the developer is to come up with pitches that fits the brief from the publisher. So you can see that before we've even begun, we don't have an ideas person who just has free reign. We might have one individual at a developer who is receiving these opportunities and is coming up with pitches. I have seen that. More often, it's a small group of people, and they look at what they've done in the past and what they're good at and the direction that they want to take the development team in the future. And they think, is this a good fit for us? Let's keep taking the Wicked license, yeah? There'll be a lot of developers that say, that's not right for us. That's not our audience. Or we're really good at shooters and we can't see a shooter fitting in the Wicked IP, so we'll say no to it. There are other cases where a developer does have a vision for something that they really, really want to make. And so they will go proactively to publishers and to investors and to platform holders and say, can we please pitch you our idea? So if there's no ideas person, then where do the ideas come for the pitch? That comes from a collection of individuals in the team. It comes from the publisher who has a need. That need might be completely open. But normally it will be something like we mentioned before. We want to hit the PlayStation 6 audience, or we want to get into multiplayer, or whatever it happens to be. There'll be the developer that has an ambition for their own studio and their own future. Well, we want to be known for innovation, or we want to learn more about this piece of hardware that's coming out. There'll be people within the team that have got ideas about the genre, very passionate about the next step for first-person shooters or trends for role-playing games or whatever it happens to be. They'll bring that to the table. So the creative process at the pitch stage is actually fed by multiple channels. So there is no ideas man in most teams because the ideas come from everybody. Now you can see in all of those cases, even the case with the auteur, even though it's an outlier, that first step is to put together a pitch. Now, what does that pitch look like? I've actually worked in a number of places where they've done one-pagers. I'm not a fan of one-pagers. I think that it boils an idea down to such simplicity that it becomes a bit meaningless. That's a personal opinion. The alternative argument is, if you've got an idea that can't be condensed at that stage onto a single page slide or a single page of A4, then it's not worth thinking about, because at pitch stage what you're trying to do is capture the publisher or investor or the management with a very high level idea. So a pitch could be as simple as that. Ordinarily a pitch deck will be more detailed. A pitch deck, we will call it, that goes through, this is the audience, this is the ambition for the title, these are the platforms, this is the emotion, this is the strategic reason why we want to do this, this is how much money we need, this is how long it's going to take. Those are the kind of key components to a pitch deck. And depending on how confident you are when you go in there, you will have more or less information. For example, if you are Naughty Dog and you've done 2 Uncharted's and you're trying to get funding for the 3rd Uncharted, so you've got a proven track record on a beloved franchise and you've proven twice already that you can do it, the publisher is going to have more confidence in you than if you are, say, a developer who has got a track record of making quiz games and you're pitching to make an RPG. So that delta between what you've successfully done before and what you are pitching to do will be bigger or smaller, and the bigger it is, the more convincing you need to be in your pitch. Now, in many cases, the pitch will include a playable demo, and studios can invest a lot of time and effort into demos. There are a variety of people that we are pitching to, and when we're pitching to other developers, it's normally easier for them to imagine what we mean than it is for, say, marketing people or business people. The further people are away from the development process, the more likely it is that we develop interactive software as a prototype, as a pitch, so that they can see what it is that we're talking about. So you can see already that this pitching process is involving a lot of people. More than likely, it's going to be a small team of people who are chipping in. What is the direction of the studio? What do we want to take on? What do we want to do with this opportunity? And in many cases, making some interactive software. And as soon as you're making a prototype, that's going to involve several people. So what this means is that even at pitch stage, this idea is not one person's idea. It is the input of multiple people. You may have one person steering it, but it's not one person's idea. Now, pitches that go out to publishers and to clients and even internally, it's like a gamble every single time. You don't know whether you're going to get a yes or no. You don't know whether you're going to get an input, which is like, we kind of like this bit, but we need this stuff to change. And you don't know how long it's going to take. Yeah, it's very, very unpredictable. I've had it where we were working on a project and we got to the end of it. It was like a 3-year project. We got to the end of it and we were like, what's going to happen next? And they literally had a pitch from 6 years earlier that had just been, they kind of gone back over it again. And the business people said, okay, I think we're ready for this. And there were good reasons for it, actually. It was largely to do with the audience who weren't on the platform all that time ago, but were there now. So pitches can sit on a shelf for a very long time, and it can be kind of unpredictable when they come back. So that's the next big step. When a pitch gets approved and it goes to the development team, very often that team is a different group of people to the ones who are involved in the pitching. Sometimes they're completely different people. Sometimes it's just the same team, but with more voices. And that's the next critical step, because now you're getting more inputs into the process. And we're going to talk about this in future in more detail. But the next step of development, the pre-production step, is where all those ideas in the pitch deck get tested for real. And you start to get players' voices into this mix as well. So by the time you go from the pitch to the end of the pre-production process, that thing has changed again. And that's completely acceptable. Everybody who has been in this business more than 5 minutes knows that pitch deck is going to be a sense of what the game might be. It's not a full description. What happens once the team start working on it is that's when the idea really starts to develop. Now, interestingly, there will be ideas in a pitch deck which aren't practical in a big game, even when you've prototyped them. Sometimes the idea that you prototype can be really, really fun for half an hour, but it needs a metagame, or it needs changing to turn into a game that can actually be released as a 10-hour experience or whatever it happens to be. Now, here's a little thought experiment. I would guess that if you randomly picked a development team and randomly picked one person in that development team, and you said to them, this game that you're working on, whose idea was it? My guess is that they either won't know, or they will point towards a person not who came up with the idea, but who is now responsible for it. And I would say that in video game development, once we get that initial funding, the next critical thing is not whose idea it is, but who is responsible for owning this creative vision. And that person will normally be a lead designer or a game director or a creative director. That, in a nutshell, answers the question about who is the ideas person, because there isn't an ideas person. And in actual fact, when you work in game development, you realize that practically everybody on the team is an ideas person and is a creative. Because when you're in development, everybody is doing creative problem solving and everybody is bringing ideas to the table. Great, thank you so much. That wraps up our very first intro episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And as before, please let me know if there's any comments or things that you'd like me to talk about more in the future, or any questions. The next episode is going to feature roles in the team and disciplines, difference between designers and programmers and so on, and also the differences between developers versus publishers and so on. So if you've got any questions on that, let me know as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.